Oh, there we go. Good afternoon. My name is Holly Dennany, and I am with Family Partners of Morris and Sussex County, and it is my honor to welcome you to today's Lunch and Learn educational event. This is an event we host every week, and we bring in an expert to talk to you about important community resources, important information you need to know about caring for children, about families who have youth who are challenged, about the organizations in our community that support them. And today is no exception. Today we have with us Benjamin Davey, who wears a lot of different hats. We were just talking about that before I pushed record. Ben is with Department of Children. Was it protection and permanency? I told you I was going to stumble over that.
You got it. You got it.
You do a lot of different things, Ben. You've been actually in the field because I know we've added some letters to your name because a therapist, social work. I know you do a Benny's Bodega. For anybody who doesn't know, is a wonderful project that you have that helps folks who need to kind of fill in the gaps of supplies, right, for their children in their home.
Yep.
And how many years have you been in the, I'm going to say, I like the children's protective arena, because what your work does is really geared to protecting children and families when they're in a jam and they need resources. You're kind of one of the boots on the ground, right?
Yes.
That goes out and provides assessment and assistance. So how many years has this been a work's life for you?
It's funny that you asked that question because, normally, and this is the first time this has come up, normally I'd be like, oh, I've been doing this since college and I have no time, saying my age and experience, but all of a sudden I've turned 40 and I feel like a certain type of way about answering that question. But in all seriousness, I've been in this field since I graduated college in 2013. So I'm 40, so about 18 years. I've been with the division for 14 years in July. I have done many different roles and responsibilities within the division. My current role is, to your point, Holly, is I am the community liaison for the Division of Child Protection, DCP&P. You'll hear me say DIFAS just because out of habit, but we're DCP&P, we're Child Protection Office, and like I said, I'm the community liaison for the office into the community. I attend meetings. I participate in awesome events like this to try to educate as many people as we can about DCP&P in 2021. I do have a background in social work, and I do have a nonprofit that we started that's right here in Newton on Spring Street called Benny's Bodega. And yeah, we provide basic needs stuff to families that are struggling to have that need met. So I've been around a long time. Hopefully I'll be around a couple more years.
We hope so too, Ben. I know you're a popular guy within our team. Whenever we talk about a good resource, you're someone that everybody smiles, and we're happy to have you on the program today. And I'm just going to remind everybody, we will be recording today's session. So feel free to, if you want to put the pen down and listen and take in what Ben has to offer. If you have questions, when Ben is talking, feel free to either drop them in the chat or come off mute. One of the things I really appreciate about Ben's style is he likes to have a conversation. Absolutely. He's going to talk to us about what's interesting. Our topic, of course, is child abuse, neglect prevention. And I had said during COVID, and Ben and I were just talking before I pushed the record button about this very interesting stage that we are coming into and that we are in right now on June 3rd, 2021, and that things are starting to open up. Masks are coming off, and we have every expectation that children will be in school full-time, person to person in September. So Ben, if we can talk about, if you want to share thoughts on that, as far as I know, our agency, as your agency, saw a drop off in calls when things got closed off initially because folks were hunkering down and trying to survive and get food on the table. What are you seeing in your work, and what do you anticipate to see with the changes in COVID?
So we saw similar things, with kids not being in school and kids and people not being in the community as much. What it really did, and what in reality, it took them away from people who check on them, who see them, who observe them, who interact with them, who engage them. And really it's about schools. Different schools have different policies and procedures about in-person learning. And because there wasn't as much in-person learning or as much engagement with children as there normally would have been in a non-pandemic atmosphere, our referrals actually went down to our referrals to the agency actually went down. We saw a substantial decrease in referrals, and actually still see that right now. Now, to that point, to your point, Holly, about transitioning out, just because that we had a decrease in referrals, that doesn't mean there wasn't an increase in in-home stress, an increase in anxiety related to children's school, related to money, related to all the other things that we struggle with on a daily basis. So while our referrals were down, I think it's safe to say, and I think logic would dictate that families still struggle with anxiety. And if you add and the stress of daily living, and if you add a pandemic to that and the idea of getting immunized and getting to school and having to do all your kids' schoolwork and follow up with X, Y, and Z, I think it's safe to say as we transition away from masks and the world starts opening up again, I think it's logical. And I think it's, like I said, safe to say that we're going to see an increase in people needing and accessing, mental health services. People need, people need an outlet to relieve some of the stress. And as we were talking before we started pressing recording, as a society and as a world, we absolutely emphasize physical health. We go to doctors, we have physicals, we get blood work, we do all that stuff, and that's important. But there's not necessarily that emphasis on mental health. And for somebody like me, who has a background in social work and mental health, it is absolutely as important to take care of yourself mentally as it is to take care of yourself physically. So to your point, Holly, as we start to open up, I absolutely expect, and our agency absolutely expects, to see an increase in people needing assistance, people accessing or just kind of needing to know where to go for assistance. And in our agency, to our agency's credit, DCP&P has, kind of changed its philosophy. So if you do call our hotline or you do access a local office for information, you're not going to get the cold soldier anymore. You're not going to call the hotline. You're going to get information, or you're going to get to unfortunate pleasure of speaking to somebody like me who will guide you and try to do their best to help you with resources. So yeah, to your point, I think we're going to start to see an uptake and an increase in people needing and wanting access to mental health services.
And I bet I'm glad you mentioned you did a presentation for us. We were trying to figure out exactly when, but we did record it. And for anyone on the call who did not see Ben's conversation we had last time, which is where he was just really talking about DCP&P and the changes in what the intent and the really, instead of removing a child from the home, you do everything you can to help that environment to keep the child where there are the most resources and connections. So I really encourage those on the call, if you didn't see that conversation, to check it out, because Ben, I think it's really important that we understand that what a help it is. Like sometimes people feel like it's a punishment. There's like a threat, and I'm going to call DCP&P or DIFUS, right? Like that was a threat, but really what you had said to us, I'll pare it back and you correct me if you need to, but you said, when someone calls DCP&P or when you show up, it's because someone needs help more so than someone needs to be punished. Correct. Or removed, because I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't have all the letters after my name, but when a lot of times when there's abuse, it's because folks are under a lot of pressure. It doesn't justify the abuse, but and that's an indicator that support is needed. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. In 2021, DCP&P doesn't act punitively. We're not here to put anybody in trouble, quote unquote, or get anybody in trouble. What we want to do is minimize any abuse and neglect in the home, because we know that abuse and neglect of children, which really is childhood trauma, we know that childhood trauma increases everybody's risk to mental health issues, to substance use disorders, and to not being able to handle stress and anxiety appropriately. So what we want to do is when we get called, we want to say, hey, this is why we got called. What can we do to help if this allegation is true? And if this allegation isn't true, why do you think somebody would call? And is there anything that you need going forward that our agency can help with? So our perspective has changed, and our relationship and the way that we gauge has changed. And I hope people who have interactions and communication with us find their experience to be a little bit different, as opposed 5, 6, 7, or even longer years ago. Mm.
And, it's an interesting thing we've discussed within our team is that I think COVID has put folks who weren't under pressure necessarily before, right, in a higher pressure situation. But I think it gives everybody a little bit more empathy towards what happens in a household when things are starting in a downward spiral with different pressures and the compression, right? It's almost like the vice is tightening. I think we all know a little bit more what that can feel like, and that sometimes we aren't even aware that we need help. Is that fair to say?
Right.
families think that what's happening is just what's going to happen. And I think sometimes it takes a third party stepping in to say, this really isn't the way it needs to be, and let us help you find a better day. So, well, thank you for that insight. And again, I'm just going to remind those who've just joined the call, feel free to drop questions in the chat or come off mute if you have questions. But Ben, what will happen? I mean, people might be reaching out for help more often, but it also sounds like there might be more opportunity for people in the community, in the schools, to see signs of neglect or abuse. I mean, can you help us understand what it is that we might be looking for, or what it is we should do?
That's an important question, and I'm glad that you asked, Holly, because there's not a simple explanation, and there's never ever going to be, anybody in my position is never going to provide you with a concrete list of, if this happens, this means abuse and neglect. You know, we're human beings, and everybody perceives and interacts differently, and communicates differently, and every situation that we have as humans affects us differently. So I can't sit here and say, if you see X, Y, and Z, call the hotline, because that means abuse or neglect has occurred. Now, with that said, there are things that we can look for, and there are things that we can be educated about. So if, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 things happen, when we can start putting together a little the pieces to the puzzle, and we can start to formulate a story. And what do I mean by that? Some things that we can look for. So as somebody who goes out, or used to go out to people's homes and question and interview people about abuse and neglect, what are some of the things that we look for? So unexplained bruises to children of a younger age, right? Bruises on their side, on their chest, not on their knees, not on their elbows. You know, those are typical spots where kids are going to fall down and get bruises. They're kind of your everyday kind of things. But you know, if a 5-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 3-year-old has a bruise on the middle of their stomach, that is something that we can question, and we can ask the family about, and how that happened, and we can talk to the child about that. Now, it doesn't mean that bruise on the stomach is a result of abuse and neglect, but it does raise a red flag, as we say. So that in and of itself doesn't mean, like I said, abuse and neglect occurs, but it starts a conversation. Some other things, unexplained behavior, or a change in behavior. You may see a kid who's going to school and maybe an ABC type student, but then, you know, the next semester he's or he or she's a DE. I had an E. I say E because E was in my high school, so F. DE or F, and all of a sudden their grade performance or their school performance has changed. Now, again, that doesn't mean her abuse and neglect occurs, but that does raise a red flag as to why this person of straight A's and B's is now, you know, performing poorly in school. A change in attitude. Somebody who, you know, was quote unquote popular or engaged people in school is now, you know, not showing up for school, or is has a poor attitude about school, or doesn't care. Her dress or his dress has changed. His appearance has changed. Now, again, nothing that in and of itself leads to you to believe that abuse and neglect has occurred. But if all this stuff is going on, or there's a couple things going on, then you can start to ask questions. And then when you start to ask questions, you can start to formulate a story and put together some of the pieces. So when we talk about prevention of abuse and neglect, and we talk about indicators of abuse and neglect, there's 2 things that we can do as people and as humans. And those 2 things are, they're not simple, but they're 2 things that we need to be aware of, and that we can do. And those 2 things are education. We can be aware of what abuse and neglect looks like. We can be aware of its impact on somebody, and impact, I mean behavior, right? We know that, like I said earlier, that abuse or neglect, actual abuse and neglect, is childhood trauma. We know that childhood trauma adversely affects children. And that adverse effect could be behavior, it could be mental health, it could be in school, it could be a variety of different things. So education about what childhood trauma looks like, education about what abuse and neglect look like, and its impact on children, and what it looks like not only for a child at 5, 6, 7, but what it looks like at 18, 19, 20. You know, because things, as we all know, things that we experience as a child, they don't go away, they stay with us. And if as parents we're unaware of the impact, we compound the problem. And we compound the problem, the only thing that we're doing is increasing the likelihood of there being an issue later on in life. And an issue later on in life is very difficult to diagnose. It's very difficult to get help for. And it's also very difficult to treat and address prior to them or him and her having kids again. So then we get a cycle, right? So education about childhood trauma, education about abuse and neglect, and just being aware, even if it's some of the indicators that I mentioned before and its impact, is absolutely the most important thing that we can do to kind of prevent abuse and neglect. Now, on the flip side of that, I talked about engaging and asking children questions in interview. So the next thing that on top of education, the next most important thing is a relationship with your children, a relationship with your students, a relationship with the people that you have on your caseload. And it does, and when I mean relationship, it's not an inappropriate relationship or some sort of intimate relationship, because we all know that those types of relationships will get us in jail. What I'm talking about is a relationship where there's trust, where there's mutual respect. It's been my experience that if you give respect and you are not accusatory and you're there just to ask questions to help, you will have a better relationship, and your outcomes when something bad happens of getting information will drastically increase, as opposed to if you have no relationship with that person in your life. So, and I'll say it to this, if you in your own personal life have a poor relationship with a niece or a nephew, or your parent or your sister or your sibling, you don't have to answer the question. Just think about your relationship. Just think about what would happen if something bad happened. Who would you speak to? What would you convey to them? The interaction with somebody that you don't have a relationship with is drastically different than someone that you have a trusting relationship with. So if abuse or neglect is going on in a person's life, having that trusting relationship will absolutely lead to a better ability to get that information from them. Because without getting that information from them, somebody from my agency, we can't do anything unless we know about it. So when we talk about childhood abuse, we talk about prevention, we talk about indicators. There's two main things that we can do, and I'll just reiterate and kind of repeat myself. It's education, it's educating ourselves, it's educating the community about abuse and neglect and childhood trauma and its impact. And it's also formalizing and understanding the importance of having respectful, trusting relationships with people, because those relationships will lead to that person communicating what is going on. Hopefully I didn't repeat myself too much and that makes sense.
It's really interesting too, Ben. Something I wanted to ask you about also is, I think sometimes when we think abuse in a scenario, we think someone, well, I mean, is it just a mean person, or is it somebody who has a hard time regulating their emotions, right? Isn't there a difference between anger management, and that can be kind of like rolling a question into a question, because sometimes anger management comes out in adults and sometimes anger management is present in youth. And can you talk a little bit about both of those scenarios and what you might do? Because again, it can be a very complex thing. As a matter of fact, when you were describing signs to look for in youth, from changes in grades, appearance, attitude, dress. It was interesting because I was thinking to myself, some of those things can also be identified with depression or anxiety. Like it's very difficult, which is why I think you want all those letters after your name. It's really hard, right, to really pay attention and collect the information to find out what it is that's going on. And each scenario is different. Right? Like there's no, this always means this, always means that. So if you don't mind, could you talk a little bit about anger management? Or if there's like, for instance, if a child, like sometimes when a child acts out, and that can be coming from a lot of different things, but what can be going on? So what would you recommend if a parent has a child that's acting out?
So I think, and that's a great question, because I could not agree more with you. That a lot of times, anger. So the most important thing here to identify is that anger is a secondary emotion. And what do I mean by that is that 99.9 out of 100 times is that before somebody gets angry, there's another emotion there, whether that's embarrassment, whether that's disappointment, whether that's frustration, whatever emotion that is, there's always an emotion before somebody gets angry. So, and I also will add to the fact that most people are not psychopaths. What do I mean by that? Most people don't wake up that day and say, you know what? I'm going to physically assault my child. I'm going to physically hurt my 5-year-old and 6-year-old child. Now, do those people exist? Absolutely. Unfortunately, they do. But the vast majority of people don't want to hurt their kids. right? So that leads us to the question as why do they then? So to Holly's point, yeah, it's a mismanagement, not a mismanagement. It's an overwhelming of some sort of feeling. It's, I can't handle this. I have stress about money. I have stress about life. I know that I'm not making enough money. I want to get a better job that I can't. I'm feeling a certain type of way about life. And because I can't handle that, or because I don't have the skills to handle what's going on, or I don't have the ability to communicate it, or I don't have somebody to communicate it to, because of all that, I'm a human being. And because I'm a human being, the emotion and the energy has to be released. And a lot of times, yeah, it's released in an inappropriate way. It comes out as anger. It comes out as violence. It comes out as me not being able to manage myself, punching holes in the wall, screaming, using vulgarity, doing things that I know are wrong and inappropriate, but I can't control it because I can't manage all the other stuff that's going on in my life. So we talked a lot about transitioning away from COVID and people accessing mental life. Life is difficult and life is challenging for all of us. If you add money struggles, you add life struggles, you add COVID struggles, a death in the family, a financial hardship, not having a car, all that stuff compounds itself. And if you are unable to release it, to have the ability to release it, the skills to release it, or the opportunity to release it, trust me, it comes out somewhere. And a lot of times it comes out as anger. And these aren't angry people. All right, some people, yeah, they have a lot going on and they have some things in their life that they're angry about. I'm not going to say that that's not true, but a lot of times it's unaddressed childhood trauma, unaddressed poor relationships with peers, siblings, family. I don't make enough money to support my family, and that makes me feel like not a productive father or not a good person. I have different abilities that don't mean that I have money in my bank account, meaning I'm good at a lot of things, but it doesn't mean I have money in my bank account. So help me get a better job. I'm stressed about that. I'm stressed out that I got to send my kid to school and then come home and do specials with them. I don't know how to do math, and top of that, I got to worry about my rent. So like life is difficult. And yeah, anything that we as human beings don't address, or we don't have the ability to address or the opportunity to address, it's going to come out. And in a lot of times it comes out as anger. And again, anger is a secondary emotion. And a lot of times it's preceded by frustration, embarrassment, disappointment, stress, all that other stuff that we have to deal with as humans. So to your point, yeah, anger management becomes vital to kind of people surviving and being appropriate with their children. But it's more than just managing anger. It's understanding where those feelings are coming from, why you have those feelings, and then understanding that those feelings, because we're humans, are going to come back, right? We're going to have negative experiences in our life. People are going to mistreat us. People are going to lie to us. And how we handle them is going to be what propels us forward or what holds us back. And I hope that makes sense.
It does make sense. It's just, again, there's no two situations that are alike, but let me ask you again, though, about a youth. If you've got a parent who's got a child who has outbursts or anger, what resources would you recommend a parent consider? Whether it's, of course, I think to myself, oh, I would go to the school, but now that we're coming into summer,
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Because I like that you point out anger is not usually anger. Anger is something else. Saying anger is frustration or disappointment or sadness. What would you say to a parent who says, I'm not even sure where to turn, and then I've got a young person who's having a lot of outbursts?
So that's a great question. So if somebody like me was knocking on your door, or you were speaking to someone like me, I would say the following, and I would say the following knowing that, and this is my job. So forgive yourselves if you don't know this, but this is part of my job. The state of New Jersey actually gave as CSOC, is the System of Care for Children, a lot of money. And what that means is that they meaning the government, the state government, and the people who jobs it is are to provide services and support to community. They want people to access the children's system of care. And what that is perform care. So if somebody who is at home and they're struggling with a child's behavior and they don't have private insurance or money is an issue, they can access 1-877. I forget the number off the top of my head, but it's perform care. I was just going to say it and give you guys.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. It would have been funny if I made up a number and you guys are all, what's that crazy guy talking about? But all jokes aside, it's Perform Care. You can Google it. There's also Central Intake in Sussex County. People don't know about Central Intake. Central Intake is housed in Project Self-Sufficiency. It literally is the intake for the county. So you could call up Central Intake and you can say, hey, my son is struggling or my daughter is struggling with their behavior and mental health, and this is what's going on. And Central Intake will most likely give you the Perform Care number, but they'll also link you to any available resources in the county. It's a great resource, and I encourage all our workers to actually give that information out to families so families can call on their own and when they need to. Now, on the other side of that, Perform Care is the avenue. Now, if you have private insurance and you want to access a private therapist, that's your desire. There's a number on the back of most insurance cards that you could call, and you can say, hey, which provider in my area accepts my insurance? And then you could reach out to those people and you could try to work with the therapist on privately. If you don't have the means to access private services, Perform Care is 117% the way to go. It's all free. They come to the house, they do an in-home assessment, and after that in-home assessment, they make a recommendation for services. It's not a perfect system. You may hear people have negative experiences with the system, and I'd be lying to tell you if all the interactions with the system are positive. But with that said, it is the avenue for people in the community to access mental health or behavioral services for the child that are experiencing or kind of going through that thing.
And do you know offhand, someone asked a question, you were mentioning Central Intake, which I will make sure to include in our follow-up email that goes out. Is there a counterpart to that in Morris County that you're aware of? And if you don't know, I'll make sure I look into it so that we can share that information if there is.
So I do not know that off the top of my head because I stick to Sussex.
Yep, no, that's fine. I'll look into that too. Cheryl asked that question. I will follow up with that. Just lost my train of thought. But Perform Care, what I wanted to say too, and again, I might be preaching to the choir depending on who's on the call, but you can't be shy when you call Perform Care about what's going on, right, Ben?
Correct.
You need to say exactly what's happening. Not my son gets angry a lot is a different statement than he tried to push his brother down the stairs. There's again, this is a difficulty with all of these topics because we're all, we have pride and we're embarrassed to admit perhaps maybe how far things have gone, how bad things have gotten, or just how much we're struggling. So isn't it important to really just lay the facts out as they are and let the experts decide what the best course of action is at the time?
Absolutely. The more information, the better. The more specific the information, the better. CSOC does a very good job of engaging, of answering and asking questions. But to your point, Holly, yeah, sometimes we're overwhelmed and we forget things. Sometimes our pride steps in the way and we don't always relay the most accurate, most useful information. So I can't emphasize enough the need, even when you call the hotline to report abuse or neglect concerns, anytime you're speaking with a social worker and they're asking you questions about what's going on, absolutely be specific. If you can provide dates, provide dates. If you can provide specific behaviors with specific dates, even better. But the more information we have, the better assessment we can complete. And that's just with anything. If you're sick physically and you go to the doctor and you have 7 symptoms, but you only tell 2, the doctor's diagnosis is going to be different as if you gave them all 7 symptoms. You know what I mean? So more information, the better. And we work better with having more information. Absolutely. Great question and a great point.
That's great. And I'm getting a few questions here, Ben. I'm just going to share with you.
Please.
Someone asked, and this is interesting because what falls under DCP&P and what doesn't, but what happens if you are concerned that your youth is talking to someone online who might be a lot older? Like if there's a questionable, is that a DCP? Who do we call as a parent? What are your options on something like that?
So first things first, if you feel like somebody's talking to somebody inappropriate as a parent, you need to be protective of your child. Safety and the protection of your child comes first prior to anything. So while that child may be disappointed, sad, or whatever about losing his or her engagement online, or a friend, quote unquote friend online. If that person is an adult and they're saying or doing inappropriate things to your child, you absolutely have to be protective and manage the safety of your child. And what that means is you have to cut contact, right? Especially if you know it's inappropriate, because we know that there's a lot of predators online. We know that there's a lot of people out there doing a lot of inappropriate stuff online. And as a parent, like I said, you need to be protective of your child. And if you know something is going on, you need to make sure that that contact is terminated. And then on the flip side of that, you need to report that to the police. It becomes a criminal matter. It becomes now. Listen, you need to have, the police operate with evidence too, right? So it's going to be difficult if you call the police station and say, "Hey, I suspect that my child is talking to a 35-year-old man," and they're going to ask, "Well, how do you know that?" So it's important that you have that information and you have answered to the question, how do you know that? And any proof and documentation, of course, is all the better. But yeah, you got to report that to the police. And if it's something that's ongoing and you know that it's Sam Smith that's talking to your child and Sam Smith's not leaving your child alone and it continues, yeah, you could give our hotline a call and we can work with the police. But really it's really put back onto you as a parent to make sure that your child is safe. And to make sure that they're following whatever appropriate rules you set forth as a parent for them online. And I can't encourage everybody enough. There's technology out there. There's parental controls out there. There are things that you can do to mitigate any sort of inappropriate stuff online. And I'll speak from just experience myself. There is nobody on this call or in Sussex County that's more ignorant about technology than myself. I was born in 81, so it's not like I grew up with it. Different world type deal. So I'm very ignorant, but I also have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, right? So if I want to remain having that trust and good relationship that we talked about, it's going to be incumbent upon me to educate myself about what they're doing online and who they're speaking to. And then having that relationship to them, if something is going on, I'm able to come to them and say, "Hey, this is what I think is going on. Is this true? What's happening?" And then they feel comfortable to kind of convey that to me. But I really cannot emphasize enough the importance of being educated about what online stuff that you can use to prevent this, the parental controls. And then if you do find out something is inappropriate, just terminate the relationship right away, access the police, and then follow their lead and their recommendations.
Which, and I'll tell you a couple thoughts on that, Ben. First of all, you have to be aware of what your kids are doing, which I think
Absolutely.
Sometimes social media, they fall off, they go into another room and we're not aware. But two things I wanted to make our listeners aware of. We have next week's Lunch and Learn. Actually, we have someone coming from the Human Trafficking Prevention Coalition in New Jersey talking about social media, because it's come to our attention, right? Like all the TikToks that everybody's so excited about over COVID and all the different platforms that many adults aren't well versed in. They're going to talk about some of the things that we really need to be careful with and understand how a child might be duped, or how we can be aware if a child is being duped. So that's next week's Lunch and Learn topic. And we also are working on getting a speaker for my colleague Diane Varga, who's on this call, runs a support group for moms on Thursday nights, and they have requested a speaker on how to do your basic safeguards on social media or on different technologies to help keep our kids safe. Nothing is foolproof. I mean, you really have to be involved. We've also had speakers on gaming, which we have recordings of that on our YouTube, but it was interesting to me, Ben, to your point, is the last time we had somebody speak on gaming, the first question the speaker asked of the parents on the call was, "What games do you play?" And most parents were like, "I don't play a game." And he was like, "Well, that's mistake number one," because he said, "How do you understand what it is your kids are doing if you're not at least involved?" And also as far as that whole being aware of what they're doing. I think most of us, because I'm not your most your technologically savvy person, but I think it's easy for us to say that's for them and not for me. But it's a different way of parenting. It's a different time. So those are some resources that we have coming up regarding technology. And if I can look at my other questions, and please, folks, feel free to keep dropping questions in the chat. We had a question regarding reunification, Ben. The question is, compared to 20 years ago, have the statistics changed as far as reunification with parents? Or more resources available to help with reunification? And I think that's in regards to foster care.
Yeah, okay, so that's a great question. So as we as an agency and as a state, as we start to learn and as we start to become educated on what success looks like for everybody, as an agency, and it got to be something that, if I was being honest with you, I'm proud to be a part of, as a representative of DCP&P, they've made a substantial stride in understanding the importance of family. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, yes, in some instances that we have to come in and remove children for their safety, and we place with resource parents or foster parents. But under this current administration, and really prior to that, the emphasis has changed from removing children to keeping them safe in their home. So in answer to specifically answer your question, yeah, statistics have drastically changed in that we don't remove children, not nearly to the frequency that we used to 20 years ago or more. And we know that now, that if we keep families together and we work with moms, dads, grandparents, caregivers to keep their kids safe, we know that the outcomes will be better or have the potential to be better. Now, listen, there are certain situations that are very bad, and we have to come in and we have to remove children, and we don't have time or the availability in that moment to plan with family, and that happens. But 9 out of 10 times, 8 out of 10 times, we're planning with that family. And if we can't plan with that family to keep the kids within that family safe, we're communicating with relatives. We're communicating with that family who they identify as family. And that could be family friends. You know, we all have Uncle Jimmy, who's not really an uncle, but we call him Uncle Jimmy, right? So we're engaging families. We're communicating with families differently, more effectively. We're asking questions. We're understanding why whatever occurred is going on. And then in situations where there used to be removal and we'd ask questions later, we're keeping those families together. The state pays for services. They have contracts with agencies who work with families to keep families together, to mitigate risk, to increase what we call protective factors, things that the family are doing to keep kids safe. So it's not just, hey, this punitive, you did this wrong, we're taking your kids, you work to get them back. It's, hey, we get that this happened. We don't want this to happen again. Let's work together so that we can keep everybody safe. And in doing that, we'll mitigate any sort of future involvement from our agency or any future abuse or neglect incidents. I hope that helps.
I think so. And if it doesn't, the gal who asked the question, or gentleman, please speak up.
Let me just add, and I don't
go
mean
ahead.
to
No, please do. No,
I don't
go
mean
ahead.
to interrupt you. I'm sorry, Holly, because I just got a thought. So to the point, and I just want to add, because this is an important part, resource parents, right? I would be on these calls, and I even think as late as the last call I was on with you guys, I even made a small pitch for any foster parents that were out there. So you won't hear me making that pitch anymore. They've actually kind of, what's the word? Decreased, I guess is the word, the amount of foster parents or resource parents applications that they're accepting, meaning that they don't want to utilize, the state doesn't want to use resource parents. We understand that, and there are certain situations where they're necessary, but those situations, as we go forward as an agency, we hope to be few and far between. And we hope to keep kids safe and stabilized with family. So to my point and to the state's point, and to answer to your question, things have changed so much with the removal of children and keeping kids safe that we're not even asking for resource parents anymore.
Wow. And that's good news. Yes.
That's great news. It's great news. And like I said, it's no better to be better, right? So we know now that like outcomes are better if we can keep families. Not all the time, you know, families aren't always the solution. So I don't want, I'm just speaking in generalities, but generally speaking, the state is making a push to keep kids with family where possible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that's probably true across the board, right? For a lot of our organizations. I mean, even with a family support organization, we are seeking to link families to supports that exist in the community yes. at no out-of-pocket cost, because a lot of times, again, back to our earlier comment, that if people are struggling, it's very hard sometimes to look to your left and your right and consider what resources that you have available, because the resource might be the coach of the softball team, or the choir director at church, or the neighbor, right. or the aunt that you're not comfortable to reach out to. And that's another point that I just wanted to remind folks of is support groups, which I know some people are hesitant to participate in, but support groups, we offer many. I know other organizations, Mental Health Association is one, offers support groups. And sometimes if you have something, say you think your child's talking to somebody too old on online, say you suspect there might be abuse of a neighbor's child, whatever the scenario might be, come to one of these support groups and share your concerns and get feedback and connection on resources. Or sometimes these things we feel like we have to keep them private, and I think that works against us, does it not, Ben? I mean, the minute we're not sure what to do and we go inward, the chances of getting help and a better tomorrow gets pushed back a little bit.
I couldn't agree more with you. And if confidentiality wasn't the law, and I could share with you the number of people who we've helped in the community as an agency, you would be shocked by some of those names, because struggle doesn't discriminate, right? We all struggle. We all go through periods in our life where we need help. And if you don't know those places to go get help, or you're unwilling to get help, or pride steps in the way, things can go down a path that you don't want them to go down, right? And that leads me to my previous point, where people don't wake up wanting to abuse or neglect their children. They just don't. They get led down there through a path, right? So to your point, Holly, yeah, I mean, if we can get people to access services, if we can link people to the community, if we can link people to the knowledge that they need to make it through a difficult time, that's all the more better, not just for that family, but for our community as a whole. And now I'll do a shameless plug with Benny's Bodega, because it is a resource here right in Newton. It's right on Spring Street. We offer, people call us a food pantry, but we're not. We're an experience, right? You come and you shop for the stuff that you need: food, clothes, hygiene, personal care items, cleaning supplies, any of the stuff that you need that's causing you stress. I don't have enough food, I got family coming over, or whatever the case may be, and I don't have clothes, I don't have school clothes for my kids. You can come to us. We're not going to hand you a bag of food that you're not going to eat. We're not going to hand you a bag of clothes that are too small or smell like smoke. We're going to allow you to enter our bodega, and you can come shop for the stuff that you need, with the idea that we're decreasing any shame or embarrassment that you may feel in doing that. So we understand, and I say we understand at Benny's Bodega, we understand at DCP&P, the pride and some of the shame that's associated with asking for help. But I can't emphasize and stress the importance of asking for help enough. We all have struggled. I would be lying to here if I told you in my 40 years, I never asked for help, or I never was on my knees asking for just a little reprieve of whatever I was going on. And I'll say it again, struggle doesn't discriminate. Struggle doesn't care if you have money. Struggle doesn't care if you're poor. Struggle is real. And if you fail or are unable to reach out for help, then it just compounds itself. So to your point, Holly, absolutely. Linking people to community, getting people involved in the community, getting people to support groups, having people like Diane Varga in the community to run support groups are so important, and is so relevant to getting for people getting help. I can't stress that enough. And, all of our community members and everybody who access us are appreciative of your agency and you and of the Diane Vargas of the world, seriously, because without you guys, there would be a lot less education and a lot less support groups and people out there. So you guys really should be commended for what you're doing. 100%.
Wow. We appreciate that very much, Ben. But I mean, I think it also, I think we have some guidance counselors on this call as well. It's like, I think you can't state enough how many resources are out there. Sometimes you just don't know about them. Benny's Bodega is a great example of something that's new and growing, but there are other, for instance, sometimes, Family Partners of Morris and Sussex County, we don't ourselves run a food pantry, but we make it our business to know what options there are in the 2 counties that we cover, right? Absolutely. And that's something that's changing all the time with COVID and just in general. I mean, things pop up in a great way, things disappear sometimes too. So I really think whoever it is that you can talk to, or if you know someone who's struggling, you can drop little hints about resources that are available or people that are willing to share. And I know someone had made a comment earlier in the chat just about like even calling Perform Care. That can be a little overwhelming, but we have Family Partners has a warm line set up. And one of the things we can do is talk with somebody about what's going on and perhaps what you can and should say when you call Perform Care to make sure that you are building your case, you're explaining all the important details that you need to do. So there are resources out there for sure.
Absolutely. And all the more reason to call central intake, because central intake, that one number, they're going to lead you to everything in the county. So you don't have to call 67 different agencies and get 67 different responses. You can call one agency and get one response and a list of recommendations that's in the area, you know, and I think that that's a lot more valuable than making all the, because that's just frustrating and annoying. And when you need help, hearing the word no becomes so annoying and frustrating. And hearing the word no, just sometimes it says, you know what, screw it, I don't need it, I'll just go on. And getting the yes or getting a list of recommendations can just be that impetus that you need to get going. So central intake could really be a valuable resource if you're looking for resources in the area. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. And also I know we've had New Jersey 211 come on our program before, and that's another place where if you call and tell them what it is you're looking for, they can connect you statewide to different resources. And I think something that I remember from that presentation that I just want to share with you is sometimes they ask questions, but it is totally anonymous. But they ask questions to give feedback to the organizations they represent so that they understand, for instance, where somebody might be calling from for purposes of, we had a lot of calls from Morris County regarding X, Y, and Z. So that's another thing that I'll make sure I include the number for when I send the information out after this, because I think that's a good resource. Ben, I have a question for you about what is the difference between, I mean, abuse we talked about, and bruises are something that's like an obvious thing I think that most of us think about or know about. What are the parameters of neglect?
So neglect, that's a great question. So neglect, if I was breaking it down and just simply just stating what neglect is, it's an absence of basic needs, supervision, food, shelter, that sort of thing is what neglect is going to look like. Now, again, people don't wake up saying, you know what, I want to be hungry today, or I want to wake up in a house that has electrical wires running through it, right? It just kind of happens. And you kind of get there somehow, some way through a lot of different experiences, right? But neglect, if we're getting a call about neglect, there's going to be an absence of some sort of basic need, including supervision. I would probably say to you that supervision is going to be the one that we get more calls on. You know, children in the car, you know, X amount of kids being left home alone while mom or dad run out, whatever the case may be. And I will add, because I always add in with supervision, there is no law, there is no age that you hit in the state of New Jersey where you are automatically allowed to be unsupervised. It is a parental decision based on that child's age, developmental status, needs, intelligence, all that stuff. So if your 8-year-old is fully capable, has a cell phone and can stay home, then your 8-year-old can stay home. If your 16-year-old is a lot like me when I was 16, you probably don't want them home alone. So it all depends on a child and that specific situation in terms of supervision. But I can tell you that we do field a lot of neglect calls when it comes to supervision, along with, you know, failure to provide basic needs, food, shelter, water, electricity, stuff like that. And I will add to educational neglect is another one. And I'm in the works of scheduling an educational neglect seminar through our educational partnership, just so we can provide schools the opportunity to talk about educational neglect and what that looks like. Because I'm pretty sure what the school would constitute as educational neglect is not congruent with what DCP&P constitutes educational neglect. So I think there's some conversations that we can have as schools and as an agency and to kind of get on the same page. But I would be remiss if I didn't identify educational neglect as another form of neglect as well.
Okay, I would like to know more about that then. What's the difference between what the school's view of that is and what DCP&P, if you can, just a little bit, like I'm very curious.
So just one thing real quick. So if a school, my phone's ringing and I do have to get my kids at 1 o'clock and my wife's going to kill me if I don't.
Okay. Last question.
No, we're good. My school's a couple minutes away, so we're good.
Okay.
So educational neglect. So the one main difference is that schools will call when they have a child or children who are truant for an extended period of time and they don't have doctor's notes, they don't have reasons for the truancy. Now they'll call our agency and we'll accept the referral and we'll go out to that family's home and we'll ask them what's going on. 9 out of 10 times they have a reason. that they either failed to provide the school, or they didn't provide the school with the whole reason, or whatever. There's a miscommunication with the school, or they did provide the information to the school and the school's not believing the information. But when we get involved in educational neglect, we want to figure out what is going on and how we can prevent it from going on further. Now, where truancy starts to become actual neglect, according to DCP&P, is when the school has filed truancy charges against the family and there's an outcome from the court. So as an agency, we'll field those calls and we'll send an investigator or a social worker out to the home to assist that family and help that family or motivate that family to get the child back to school or in school more consistently. And we'll work with the school to have that, to mediate that communication gap. But as an agency, we're not going to substantiate or establish neglect unless truancy charges have been filed from the school and there's an outcome from the judge. So I know that, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's interesting. Diane, I see you shaking your head. I think this is probably something you've dealt with too, because I mean, school refusal is also a bigger problem, I think, than most people realize, right? I mean, that is a challenge, especially, I'm thinking to myself as you're describing this, like, you know, how will that be impacted by these kids who now have to go to school? Because as we know, COVID has presented a lot of challenges for everybody, but for some kids, there was a comfort in sitting at home in their bedroom and on a laptop instead of physically being in the school. So that becomes a little bit more complicated, right? To determine if there is neglect.
There were a lot of kids who benefited from the virtual experience of school. And I spoke to a lot of different kids who said, yeah, I like being virtual. I don't got to go. I don't got to do X, Y, and Z. I'm almost positive that Governor Murphy said that that's not going to be an option next year. So come September, there's going to be in-person learning, and we're going to have to get back to what it was pre-pandemic. And yeah, there's probably going to be some kids who are reluctant to go or give their parents attitude or, you know, flat out say, I'm not going. Now, what's a parent's response to that? Call Perform Care. Get somebody out there to help that family, to help talk to that family, to help that family understand the importance of school and to understand that there's not a virtual option anymore. And whatever the school reason for the school refusal is, somebody therapeutically is going to have to work through that with the family. And then to that, you could call our agency, and all we're going to do is link to the community. We're going to get you involved with someone like Diane. And we're going to try to help you get back to school, but we're not going to do anything further than that unless the school has filed truancy charges and there's an outcome from a judge.
But also too, it sounds like, and I know this is maybe stating the obvious, but communicating with the school that there's a challenge, right? I mean, I think sometimes parents forget that these teachers, most of them get it. Most of them realize there's a challenge. I see the good father checking his clock to make sure he's not missing his kids. Are there any closing questions? Ben, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And I appreciate all the questions that we got in the chat. I know I promised Terry that I will be sending out following this presentation, the recording, but I'll also send out the numbers that we talked about, central intake. I'll double check if Morris County has a counterpart to that. I'll send you the 211. Or maybe even I'll put some contact information there on Benny's Bodega just to spice it up. But so, I also, go ahead, please.
DSS, Project Self-Sufficiency, is a family success center. So if you Google family success centers in New Jersey, you will get a listing of all the family success centers in the area and in New Jersey. And they're important because family success centers are different than your average nonprofit agency. There's funding there, there's programs there, and there's a lot of absolutely good resources there at a Project Self-Sufficiency and other resource family success centers, I should say. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's great. Thank you for that. I will include that. And like I said, usually with the recording, we send you links to upcoming programs. So that will definitely include next week's presentation. It's actually the same link that you used today that you register. And if you are not already on our weekly distribution list or like we just sent out our calendar of events, we will be happy to add you to our list so that you see upcoming events and you can register for things that interest you. And I think on that note, Ben, I can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And like I said, we have an exciting lineup coming up for the rest of June. I say we're only on June 3rd, so we're early into June, but we're going to be talking about social media, We're going to be talking about, I lost my, of course I had everything open and now I closed it on my phone. Krista, what else do we have on tap? We've got, one thing I want to tell you is make sure you are watching your email, because we have some exciting announcements that we're working on getting together for Youth Partnership, which Krista Catano is our high energy youth coach. We're going to be doing some in-person events for the summer for youth between the ages of 13 and 21 who kind of want a safe space to come and hang out and make connections. And anything else you want to add, Krista?
No, we'll have more information out soon. We're going to do like arts in the park kind of setup. We'll have some different locations and times, and a great way for the youth to hang out and connect with peers.
That's I can't believe we're at the summer planning. We're also going to be talking about later this month, LGBTQ plus cultural training that is really helpful to explain some basics and some perceptions so that we can be accepting and welcoming of those communities. Our Spanish support group is going to have a speaker talk in Spanish on the importance of self-care. And we are also going to start for the summer doing regular presentations on the nurtured heart approach, which of course many of you have heard about. We're going to be doing some general information programs on that. And the other program I wanted to mention is our Mom Squad, hosted on Thursday nights by Diane Varga. Next week, we're having a speaker come in and talk about dynamics in a home when you've got a special needs youth in the mix. So that's a program that we are very excited to present as well. So with no further questions and no further ado, I'm gonna send Ben to get his children. And thank you. Thank you for not only being with us today, but for all that you do and the energy and positivity that you bring to a very, very important role of helping our children stay safe and helping our families be healthy, productive, happy families. So everybody, thanks for coming out. Family Partners of Morris and Sussex County hopes to see you next week at Lunch and Learn. Take care.
Well, Ollie, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.